Hello everyone, my name is Contro, and welcome back to my Past Sins Reviews, the series where I analyze one of the most beloved My Little Pony fanfictions, chapter by chapter. Before we get started, I encourage you to read Past Sins on femfiction.net. Or if you'd rather listen, I'll direct you to my reading of the first chapter. If you've done either already, or you don't mind spoilers, then let's begin with Everfree Discovery. It's the following morning after Twilight's kidnapping, when Rarity bursts into the library to check on Twilight, who isn't traumatized from the event and is in fact annoyed by it. You know, I would keep harping on how unrealistic this is, but this is a universe with talking ponies, unicorns, and pegasi who use magical artifacts to zap bad guys into good guys. Any pretense of realism is dead on arrival. But on the flip side, the exchange between Twilight and Rarity feels like it was ripped straight from the show, highlighting an advantage that fanfictions have over original works, using dialogue as a hook. For the latter, the audience isn't invested in the characters yet, so it's not as effective. But for the former, like Past Sins, where the audience already knows and presumably loves the characters, capturing those personalities and quirks shows competence on the writer's part, as well as a keen understanding of those characters. Therefore, dialogue as a hook is very effective. And here's just a blanket statement from here on out. Penstroke nails the characterization. For the most part. When we get to those points, I'll bring them up. The keyword being when. In case you're wondering why I'm going over a hook in what's essentially the second segment of the story, well, us writers may not like to admit it, but there are quite a few people in the audience who will outright skip the prologue, thinking it's not important. In the case of Past Sins, it actually does set up the main story, so it arguably should have been chapter 1, but that's a rare exception. So it's a good idea to use a hook for both the first chapter and prologue for any writers out there who want to insert the latter. Anyway, Rarity realizes that she's the last of Twilight's friends to check on her, and so declares that she owes Twilight a favor, her equivalent of Pinkie Pie promises. I like that Penstroke sets this up beforehand so that when it comes into play later, it feels natural. Very nice forethought. So Rarity departs and Twilight has a few hours to herself, when it suddenly hits her that her saddlebags were left in the Everfree forest, which contain rare books from the Catch-A-Lot library, and resolves to get them back. When I first read this, it seemed kind of silly at first, but then I remembered one time I went back to an auditorium after an event just to collect the flyer I forgot there. Frankly, I'd be doing the exact same thing in her place. However, Spike stands up to her. But what if those crazy ponies are still in the forest? Do you want to get pony-napped again? Princess Celestia's guards scoured the forest last night with Segura's help. I doubt that any of those ponies are still there, Twilight rationalized. Besides, I need to get those books back. They're irreplaceable. Then I'm coming with you. No, Spike. If Spike at your service is any indication, you'd be pretty useless in the Everfree forest. But it's the thought that counts, I suppose. Twilight shook her head firmly. No, Spike, I need you to stay here in case some pony comes by. The last thing we need is every pony thinking I got pony-napped again. And what if some pony comes by to check out a book? This is a library. We can't just close it whenever we want. Twilight, you do run the library, so you technically can close it whenever you want. That doesn't necessarily make it right, but you can. Spike was not convinced. He crossed his arms and eyed Twilight. I still don't like it. Can't you find some pony to go with you? Every pony else is busy, especially after taking time to come and see me. Besides, I've been to the Everfree forest before, Spike. I know how to keep myself out of trouble. Says the pony that got turned to stone by a cockatrice. Says the dragon that had to run from a pack of timber wolves. You have no room for snark here, Spike. Still, if I'm not back in 3 hours, you can tell the princess that I left. You can even say that I put you to sleep with a sedation spell so you couldn't stop me. Twilight, I don't want you to go because I think it's dangerous, not because I don't want to get in trouble. Oh, Spike, you beautiful, beautiful dragon. You know, it's fun to see which aspects of a fanfiction hold up and which don't. This part holds up very well, showing Spike's chivalrous side that's fleshed out much more later on in the show, especially in Gauntlet of Fire. Kudos to Penstroke on this one. Huh? Hey, wait a minute. Earlier Spike said, Princess Celestia would have my scales if she found out I let you go back into the Everfree Forest the day after you were pony-napped. Well, that's confusing. From what I understand here, Spike is worried about getting in trouble, but his main concern is Twilight's safety. That is what he cares about more, so still chivalrous, but completely relatable and understandable at the same time. Huh. Spike actually comes out pretty dynamic here. Nice. Before leaving, Twilight promises that
everything's fine.
She told him to give her 3 hours, and if she doesn't come back, then he can write to Celestia and explain what happened. So she goes into the forest, and the fantastic atmosphere from the prelude makes a comeback, setting an eerie and chilling tone. It's especially more nerve-wracking when the locator spell she placed on the saddlebags leads her right back to the clearing in the forest. However, she overcomes the urge to just teleport back and manages to locate those saddlebags. She decides to check the books and make sure they're okay by bringing them to the center of the clearing? Why? Can't she just open them up right there on the spot? Weird. But thankfully, the books are completely unharmed, so she's about to teleport when she hears rustling in one of the bushes. The suspense in this scene is extremely well done. The knowledge of what took place in the prelude, in combination with the implied suggestion that there was something hostile here after all, makes for a tense scene, punctuated by the thunder from an approaching storm. Also, Twilight is apparently afraid of snakes? Well, makes more sense than quesadillas.
They're just so cheesy.
After the thunder startles her, Twilight then hears what sounds like a filly's cry. She searches for the source and finds it to be the same bush from earlier. Twilight crept over to the bush as quietly as possible. As she drew close, she reached out with her magic and began to carefully grasp at the branches. If whatever was inside the bush decided to run away, Twilight wanted to at least get a good look at it before it escaped. Twilight, it's pretty clear that's a pony in there. There isn't any creature in Equestria capable of mimicking the voices of ponies that well. Oof. If there was a creature like the bear from Annihilation, then the Everfree Forest would upgrade to a whole new level of terrifying. Hey, fanfiction idea. So Twilight looks into the bush and finds Nightmare Moon. Then she finally puts the pieces together and realizes that the cult's intention was to resurrect Nightmare Moon, but it didn't quite work. Instead, she came back as a small filly. Twilight's thought process is logical and feels natural, earning this big, oh no, moment. But when she decides to confront the filly Nightmare Moon, she stops and realizes that this filly was genuinely afraid, genuinely hurt. There's no malice, only fear. And now comes something that Penstroke is exceptionally good at: presenting moral conundrums. There's little doubt that this is Nightmare Moon, but she doesn't act the part. In fact, she doesn't have any memories of her past life at all. So is she really an enemy? Is she dangerous? Should Twilight leave her in the forest and tell Celestia about her? Let her deal with it? Or does she help this seemingly innocent filly? Now, if you ask me, the right choice is pretty clear, but I understand having reservations. This is an appetizer for future scenes where the right thing to do is far more muddled, and leaves the audience wondering what they would do if they were in Twilight's position. What she ultimately decides to do is help the filly out of the bush and offer to bring her back to Ponyville. The filly eagerly accepts, and Twilight tries to teleport out, but can't. The explanation given is that she uses magic that occurs naturally in Equestria, so if there's not enough around her, she can't cast the spell. I appreciate this. It doesn't quite make sense though, considering that other spells that Twilight casts that are just as powerful, if not more so, don't seem to have this issue. But it's certainly better than the big fat goose egg that the show gives us. So Twilight consigns to her fate and walks home in the storm. We then cut to Spike, who's just about to send the letter to Celestia when Twilight bursts in and commands him to stop.
You get an F in efficiency, but I have to give you an A+ in dramatic timing.
She explains why she wasn't able to teleport back and heads upstairs while Spike prepares dinner. The filly Nightmare Moon fell asleep on Twilight's back, so she was hidden from Spike's view by Twilight's mane and saddlebags. She goes into the bathroom and... Wait, there's a bathroom? Thank you! That makes way more sense than having to go to Pinky's house to take a bath. I never understood why the show never put that in. So Twilight bathes quickly, and then washes and bandages the filly immediately after. It's in this scene where the biggest weakness of this chapter rears its ugly head. Repeating questions and information. As Twilight notes how quiet and complacent the filly is, the questions of whether she really is Nightmare Moon are here once more, just a few pages later. These are already in the back of the reader's minds, and stating that the filly wasn't acting like Nightmare Moon is unnecessary since the audience is already seeing it for themselves. There's no need to tell if you're already showing. These paragraphs should have been cut, plain and simple. Anyway, Twilight takes the filly to her bedroom and gives her dinner while she goes down and talks with Spike. I really like this. The story would have suffered dramatically if it had devolved into that hiding someone or something from the family cliche, not to mention assassinate Twilight's character.
I just came down for a late night snack, and then I decided to sorta test to make sure everything in the kitchen was in working order.
Instead, she just goes down and says, "Hey, this is what's going on, you need to be aware of this." The scene that follows, however, isn't as good, but it's not the fault of Penstroke, nor the fault of Batty Gloom, who helped revise the book. Remember how I said earlier that it was interesting to see which parts of a fanfiction hold up and which don't? Here's an example of one that doesn't. It took a bribe to convince Spike not to tell Princess Celestia about the filly Nightmare Moon. The Spike in the show wouldn't have needed one. In Equestria Girls, Spike outright defies Celestia's command when he goes after Twilight and enters the human world. He definitely has reservations and is certainly loyal to Celestia, but he's a little more loyal to Twilight. However, it came out after the 3rd season, whereas Past Sins was posted online between the 1st and 2nd seasons. And when Spike was the episode's focus in that time period, yeah, his presentation was less than stellar. So Penstroke gets a pass on this one. Twilight, on the other hand, is in top form in terms of characterization. She's afraid that Celestia would banish the filly to the moon for 1,000 years again. This is extremely excessive, and a frankly unfounded fear, so it doesn't seem logical on the surface. But remember how Twilight reacted when she thought she was going to be late on one assignment?
But she won't just send me back a grade. She'll send me back to magic kindergarten.
So Spike agrees to keep everything quiet, and Twilight returns to the filly. Here, the weakness of repeating questions and information makes a return. However, it's not quite as simple here as it is in the previous instance, so let's delve a little deeper and give this paragraph a listen. Taking a moment to steady herself, Twilight approached the filly, and again she found herself torn on just how she was supposed to act. Nightmare Moon had tried twice to plunge Equestria into eternal night, but the filly didn't seem like a danger. She should have consulted Princess Celestia already, but she just wasn't sure enough. It was a stalemate between her fear of what the filly could do and her fear of what the princess would do if she found out. She wasn't convinced enough to tell the princess, but she couldn't let her guard down either. If she did, there was a chance the filly would show her true colors, transform into Nightmare Moon, and attack. Alright, now let's list the objectives of this paragraph as far as I can tell. 1. Show that Twilight is unsure of how to treat the filly Nightmare Moon. Unnecessary. This notion was already implied in the previous scenes. 2. Remind us that Nightmare Moon was one of the most dangerous adversaries that Equestria ever faced. Mostly established. In the interest of fairness, the fact that Nightmare Moon attempted to plunge Equestria into eternal night twice wasn't mentioned prior in past sins. However, the vast majority of the audience has seen the pilot episodes by the time they start reading this book, and are therefore already familiar with her evil deeds. They already know how dangerous she is, and the fact that she's a great threat was mentioned previously. 3. Describe Twilight's inner conflict between her fear of Nightmare Moon and what Celestia would do to this seemingly innocent filly. Already established. 3 paragraphs earlier! Seriously, this just should have been cut. 4. Reveal that Twilight chooses not to let her guard down for the time being. As you may have guessed by the use of the word reveal, this wasn't established. Finally, we get new and relevant information. It's swiftly defeated when this is restated in the very next paragraph, but credit where credit is due. In the end, this paragraph serves little purpose. It needed some heavy editing, if not outright removal. Now we move on from one of the weakest points of the chapter to one of the strongest. Twilight questions the filly, asking what she remembered, which is nothing prior to getting caught in the bush. And then Twilight asks if she remembers her name. This is the question that causes her to break down and cry. This is legitimately heartbreaking. Having no identity to the point where even one's name is forgotten is a frightening prospect. Identities are unique and precious to us and those around us. So when it's lost, something, someone, is gone forever. It was a brilliant move to focus the filly's breakdown on her, frankly, non-existent name. It adds an element of tragedy to her character. Anyway, Twilight decides to try and comfort her, and again, the question of whether or not the filly was really Nightmare Moon reared its ugly head. Oh, come on, are we doing this again? But it was a question Twilight chose to shelve in her mind for later. Oh, thank you. Alright, now we enter the final scene of the chapter, and it is, without a doubt, the best one. The previous scene comes very close, but this one is more emotional and, in a way, more suspenseful. The filly asks if Twilight wants her to leave in the morning. Twilight assures her that she doesn't have to leave and can stay. This is the first time that the filly smiles before she finally goes to sleep, with Twilight following suit. This is a tender and heartwarming exchange, in no small part due to the empathy generated in the previous scene. And yet, while the audience is convinced that the filly is more than likely innocent, she's still probably Nightmare Moon. There's this flicker of doubt going through the audience's minds, just as it's going through Twilight's. Recall what I said in the previous episode. Uncertainty breeds suspense. The result is a scene that's very touching on the surface, but has an underlying sense of tension. Masterfully done. With that, we reach the end of the chapter. And it's a pretty good one. The repeating questions and information can be grating on the mind, but never to the point where it's outright insulting the audience's intelligence. Characterization is, for the most part, on point and holds up very well. The narrative is natural and flowing, and the conflict presented is very compelling. Nicely done. Thank you all so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, leave a like and comment your thoughts down below, whether positive or negative, and subscribe for more readings and analyses of past sins and other written works. My name is Contro, and until next time, good day and good night.